we're good. Hi, everyone. Welcome to MythBusters, the do's and don'ts with Business Central. It's great to see everyone. I'll let you know it's my first time at Summit and first time presenting at Summit. So I'm very excited to be here, and I'm happy to see so many faces at the end of the day today. So thanks for joining us. My name's Amy Campbell. I am a project manager with a company called Technology Management Concepts. We are a Dynamics Gold partner. And we'd be happy to talk to you. We actually have a booth at the expo, booth 634. So feel free to stop by, talk to me or any of my colleagues while you're here. We're going to get started. So we can go ahead and start recording if we haven't started yet. Okay, awesome. We're good to go. So the objectives today. The purpose of this session is to talk about the differences between Business Central and the previous versions of Dynamics Nav. So what we'll cover off today, we'll learn the differences between the online and the on-premise deployments. There's two deployment options in Business Central. We'll talk through what you need to know to develop for Business Central, and we'll talk about some of those tools. We'll learn the differences between developing in the AL language in Business Central versus the previous Nav CAL language. And we'll also learn how you can easily modify pages without being a developer. So the agenda, as I mentioned, we'll focus on the differences between current versions, or older versions of Nav, I should say, and the current version of Business Central. We'll talk about the differences between online and on-premise deployments. We'll talk a little bit about hosted environments and what that means. We'll talk about the development changes that you'll see in Business Central. And we'll also talk about extensions and what those mean to Business Central. We'll talk about converting existing customizations from your Dynamics Nav into Business Central. And then we'll touch on events, permissions, interfacing with Business Central, source code management. We'll look at the designer, which is a feature in the Business Central client. And lastly, we'll talk about the upgrade path in moving from Nav to Business Central. So just curious, do we have any developers in the room? Yeah, we've got a couple developers. And what about partners? Yeah, a few partners. And users? Nav users? Business Central users? Yeah? Oh, okay. Yeah, got a couple. Awesome. Okay. So since it is MythBusters, I figured why not go through this session with doing a little fact or fiction. So I'm going to place a statement, and feel free to raise your hand or shout out the answer. I'd also like to say that, very open communication. If you do have a question at any point, feel free to stop me. I have some colleagues sitting in the front here too, so hopefully they can have some eyes on the back of their heads. And if anybody has a question, please raise your hand and get my attention. We'll stop as we go along. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Usually if you're thinking something, somebody else in the room has the same question as well. So let's get started. So Business Central, I'm hoping that most people can answer this question. But do you think this is the new Nav? Yeah, lots of nods in the room. Yeah, we're all on track. So this is in true fact. The new release of Dynamics Nav is now called Dynamics 365 Business Central, as we all know. So as I mentioned, there's a couple of deployment options. We have the online deployment and the on-premise. So those are the two options you can choose when rolling out your Business Central implementation. So the online version, as it implies, is a 100% hosted deployment. So it's on Microsoft Azure Cloud. It is browser-based. So in order to connect with your application, you need to go through the internet. There's different ways of going about that, different clients, but it is all browser-based. And there is a new user interface and navigation in Business Central. So those of you who aren't familiar with it, although the source code and the functionality is mostly the same with some enhancement, the navigation is slightly different. So some things that you could do in your Nav client app had to change, obviously, because it's browser-based. So if you think of some of your shortcut keys, your function keys, obviously some of those things are reserved. So there are some slight changes in the navigation in Business Central Online. Now, the on-premise version, as it again implies, can be installed in-house, so on your own servers. It can also be hosted on a cloud. So just because you have an on-premise version of the software, you can still have it hosted on the cloud and have someone manage that installation for you. And you also have the option of a hybrid deployment. So let's say you want to put SQL Server on the cloud and have someone manage that for you so you don't have to worry about the maintenance and the backup plans for that. You can host parts of your tiered structure on the cloud, and some you can have in-house on your own servers. And with the latest release, so I'm not sure if everybody's heard, but Business Central just released Wave 2 earlier this month. In the latest release, the on-premise version has a new Windows 10 desktop app. So the old familiar Nav client app has gone away, and there's a new version out there. Now, I haven't taken a look at it, so I'm not sure how many differences there are between the old version, but just keep that in mind if you are moving to Business Central. So Business Central, and I just put this in there, did someone say 100% hosted? So obviously, that is true for the online version. It is a hosted environment. Again, I mentioned it's a cloud solution on Microsoft Azure. And if you were in the keynote speaker this morning, the Azure cloud server is one of the most powerful cloud servers. So when you put your financial system, your ERP system on Microsoft Azure's cloud, you can rely that you're adding a lot of power to that. And what Microsoft does for you is they manage that system for you. So it takes a lot of the burden off your company in managing your systems. They look after your server updates and, as I mentioned, SQL updates and the maintenance on there. Again, with Business Central Online, you'll connect via the internet. There's different applications that you can use. So of course you can use the browser on your personal computer. There's also a mobile app and a tablet app, and again, all through the internet. And as I said, there's no more SQL install and management. So again, that eases a bit of the burden on you for managing SQL. I know a lot of clients have come to me and said, what's the best maintenance plan for the product? So that's a challenge, definitely, for some clients in managing SQL and making sure their maintenance plans are set up. Again, installing updates to the server, right? Typically, your IT staff, they don't want to work in the middle of the night on a Sunday. But when you're hosted on the cloud, that relieves the burden, because usually those are scheduled, when they're going to happen, and it's usually during down times. So we've also got with the Business Central the power of Office 365 and Power BI and also Power Apps. So with using Business Central Online, what you can do is use Office 365's app launcher. So you can navigate easily from a browser to your different Office applications. And most of us probably are already working with Nav, with Excel, with the latest releases of Business Central. You can seamlessly, import data from Excel. You can, if you're not already, create reports in Word, so you can build those custom layouts for your Word reports. You can also work from within Outlook. So if you've got users who work a lot in Outlook, right? If you're a user that's doing sales generation, or you work a lot in Outlook, you can actually access a lot of the functionality in Business Central right from Outlook. So there's a lot of power with Dynamics 365 Business Central integrating with Office 365 and Power BI. And actually, I should say Power BI as well as the other Power Apps. So in talking about a hosted solution, there is what's called a cloud solution provider. And Microsoft typically recommends that you go with a cloud solution provider. So your provider will help you with supporting your cloud applications, And the huge benefit to going with a cloud solution provider is that they get prioritized support through Microsoft. So whereas you may create a contract on Azure, if you go through a provider with Microsoft, you'll get priority service. So it's a huge benefit. And I will just mention too, if you want more information on that, TMC, Technology Management Concept, the company I'm with, we are a cloud solution provider. So if you have questions, again, we're at booth 634, or feel free to see me after. So Business Central. Who in the room thinks that there's new development tools for Business Central? Anyone? Yeah? Yeah. That is correct. That's I've been developing with the product for 12 years, so I'm very familiar with the development environment and the object designer. So a big change for anybody who's doing development or customizations. This is a fairly big change, and something to take note of is that the development tools have changed. So in both versions, both deployments, either the online or the on-premise, you now no longer will have access to the source code. So you no longer can embed customizations right into the source solution. Instead, you need to work with different development tools, so Visual Studio and VS Code, as well as the AL language extension. So you load that in Visual Studio, and that allows you to get your hooks into the database and call different functions and have access to the different fields and tables that you might want to work with. And these hooks and customizations that you make are now called extensions. So what are extensions? How many people in the room have customizations in their database? Yeah, it's pretty common. And I mean, that's the power of the product, right? Is you're able to customize it to meet your business needs. So what has changed moving forward is Microsoft has put in a solution that allows you to separate your customizations from the source database code. So what that means is your customizations are not embedded, but instead they're layered on top of the source code. And that's very powerful, because what that allows you to do, if you think about upgrades, right? Anybody done an upgrade in the room? Yeah, I'm sure. And I imagine they've been pretty challenging, right? When your customizations are embedded in the source code, when you want to go upgrade, if that source code is changed, of course, those customizations need to be merged into the new version. So what extensions allow you to do is they pull the customization out of that source code. So when you go to upgrade, that layer just moves over, right? I mean, sometimes depending on what the customization is, there may need tweaks to the customization, but it is far more cost effective. It can be more timely, which will allow companies to stay on the current release of the product. I think that's been a bit of a challenge for a lot of companies in wanting to upgrade. There was a very high cost and very high turnaround time to move those customizations over. So this new layer of extension will allow you to move seamlessly, and that's the goal behind it. And I will also say that all of the Dynamics 365 products are moving or already have moved to this same format. So Microsoft's trying to improve how you can upgrade and how you can stay on the current version. And again, with extensions, it actually allows you to handle that code and keep it separately. So it's a better way of managing customizations. And as you can see in the diagram, we have two database sources. And we can add those extensions, right, to different databases. So if you're working with a partner and they've already done a customization or an extension, right, you request the same thing, again, cost benefit, right? You probably won't be charged, right, what it costs for them to build that from the ground up, but it's available. So again, it can be ported to upgraded databases, and it can be used for multiple clients. And there's, for the developers in the room, I have a link there as well if you want to get started on building extensions and how you go through the process of building those. I do have some flash drives that'll be available that have a copy of this presentation as well as some additional information after the session. So what is AppSource? So Apps are another form of an extension. So essentially an app is an extension. And what it is a contained set of functionality. So is anybody in the room using add-ons? A payroll add-on or a retail add-on? Yeah. So what the app source provides you with is similar type of an extension to an add-on. So if you wanted to, like I said, extend the functionality of the product, what is available to you now is called apps. And you can look for those on the app source. And there's a picture here, the app source. You can work with the different products. You can search by products for different available apps. So these are extensions provided. Some of them are provided by Microsoft and some by other companies. And these will help you, like I said, extend your functionality. And they're available to you as the user. So right from the Business Central, you can look at extensions. You can also go to the website, appsourcemicrosoft.com, and look at the available extensions to you. Now, why that's a benefit is because in the past, right, you'd go to your partner and you'd request customization. Now, at your fingertips, you can go and search for available functionality that's out there for you. So again, more cost effective. And again, these apps are another layer, right? So when you go to upgrade, those just come over with any other extensions or customizations you can have. So Microsoft is constantly updating this site, and so keep your eye on that site for different extensions. For other companies that are publishing these apps, they typically have their own websites with demos and videos and information on what the product offers. So keep your eye on that. Check with your partner on different possibilities for different available apps for extended functionality. There's a question here. Yeah, the app source would be for the online version. Yeah, correct. Yep.
Does that mean that in the current moment or in the future, you no longer will have to call your partner for like a big modification?
Right.
Just go into the app store and download the app?
Yeah, typically you would work with a partner. I mean, every partner works a little bit differently. So lots of times what will happen is the partner that you're working with will work with the partner that's supplying, or the company that's supplying the extension. But depending on what the app is, sometimes they're very simple. Like when we talk about payroll and retail, that's a big change to how you're using this system. Like it's a large piece of functionality. So you'd likely want to involve your current partner in that, right? Because you've got some business changes there. But there are some smaller apps. For example, I've seen apps where, for importing Excel into journals or importing purchase invoices, some of those are quite small. And once you load them, you don't need a lot of support, right, on them. Yeah. So does that answer the question?
Yes.
Yeah.
One follow-up.
Yeah.
So GP and SL, whatever.
Yeah.
They have probably apps too.
Yeah.
Will those apps also work in if you're using?
No. So what the extensions and what the apps do is they hook in. So you define the source, right? So you would be defining Business Central that you're hooking into, right? So the apps are built out differently for the different applications. So some companies, though, will supply solutions for GP and Business Central, right, and the different product offerings, but they'd be a different app. Yeah. So another question?
Who's responsible for if you want to combine certain assets?
Yeah. Yeah, so typically you'd work with your base partner on that. If they're touching different things, what you would have to create is some dependencies between those two to make them work interchangeably together, right, without any issues. But yeah, you typically go to your main partner on those. But I just wanted to, empower users. I know as a partner myself, I like to empower, right, the users. So, I mean, feel free, go online and, look at the available extensions, do your homework, see what's there, and then work with your partner, right? And, a great partner would would be happy that you're doing the research for them and providing that information to them. And then, like I said, those partners sometimes partner with these other companies, right, and can work directly with them. Good. Okay, so all this talk about customizations and extensions, can customizations be converted to extensions? So any thoughts on that? Yes, yeah, lots of nod. Yeah, if Microsoft was smart, they would have a way of doing that. So we've got great news. Yes, your customizations that you're currently using in Nav can be converted to extensions. You do not need to start over with your customizations. There is a way to convert them. And I'm just going to touch on this briefly. I know some of these areas get a little technical, but I just want to make you aware that there are commands that Microsoft provides for converting your current objects, right, in your current object designer to what's called AL files, which is what is translated into your extensions. So there's two commands here, export nav application object. So that takes your object out of your current nav database. There's a keyword in there, export to new syntax. So it's going to export that file as a TXT, and it's going to convert it to a new syntax, so then we can run the next command, text to al.exe, to convert it to an AL file. And you have your AL file to build your extension then. So a couple of commands will convert objects over. So if you want to upgrade and bring those customizations over, there are built-in commands, so it's not all manual work to convert those. So subscribe to events. So subscribing to events, what that means is different things that are happening in the system, right? Different events happen. A record is inserted, an entry is deleted. So with Business Central, do we have to subscribe to events? Any thoughts on that? Yeah, I saw a couple of nods, yes. So that is in fact true. So this is a slight change to how Nav worked, because in Nav, there was often several triggers within the source code, right? Like on open page, on delete record. So it's very similar to that, but what is available to you when you're working in your VS Code are these hooks into system events. So as an example, let's say that we wanted to provide a message to a user when they're entering a sales invoice in and their sales line is 0. So obviously they've forgotten to enter a quantity or a sales price on that line. So we want to notify that user, not allow them to continue. So what you would do in your extension, you would subscribe to that page event on after insert record. So once that line is inserted, but before it's committed, we want to do a check and add the code to provide a message to the user. And that extension, once it's applied to the database, runs seamlessly. So the user doesn't know that that's, Business Central source code, right? It's seamless. It all ties in using the hooks that are provided. So access to global functions. Again, anyone who's worked in Nav in the development environment knows that there's a lot of global functions that you can call. So any thoughts on whether those are still available? No, pretty quiet. They actually aren't all available. So there's been changes made within the source code to specify which functions are externally available. So the good news is you don't have to reinvent the wheel with a lot of these, because functions that make sense for you to use outside of the system will be declared as external. So certain things, in this example here, I've got the calc amount including tax. Now, of course, tax calculations are complex. So the code for that isn't exposed, but I can call that function and return the value based on the settings that I'm using, so that code is available, because we don't want to get that part wrong, right? We want that calculation to stay the same. So there is a lot of external global functions that are still available to you, but not all the functions will be available. And again, that's a benefit because you're not touching, right? Again, we have to think we're not embedding the code in the source code, because what you can do, obviously, when you're embedding into source code customizations is you can break something. So this is a benefit to limit what you can touch and how you can touch it. So it kind of tightens things up. So for the developers in the room, in order to see these external global functions, what you would have to do would be to download symbols in your VS Code using that AL language. So what that does is when you download symbols, again, it creates a hook to the database source, and it allows you to access these external functions and all your hooks and triggers and fields and tables, etc. So again, this is probably a little bit more specific to anybody who's done development, but in Nav, you used to, or you can, set permissions in objects. So what that means is if I'm creating, for example, a processing report, and I want to go modify something, let's say I want to modify in my processing report the payment method type on a vendor ledger entry. What I could do in Nav was I could give permissions from that report. So the user maybe running it doesn't normally have access, obviously, to edit vendor ledger entries, but I could explicitly imply permissions within that object. So you can no longer do that in Business Central when you're developing. You do not have a property in the same way that you had in Nav. But there is a workaround to that. So in order to do that, what you would do is you would just create a table extension or an extension to that object that you want permission to. And once that's part of your project, you can then call within the code, make those changes that you want. And when you publish that, you're not going to get a permission error saying this user does not have permission. So I just wanted to make a quick mention to that. Again, a concern with Business Central in talking about customizations and pulling the two layers apart, a concern is, will my integrations and interfaces work the same? So any thoughts on that? Think it will? Think it won't? No? So that actually is true. What's still available to you is your web services. So a lot of integration points work with web services now. XML ports, a lot of users are using XML ports to import, export data. Those are both still available. The XML ports no longer have that request page where you can supply filters, but otherwise it's the same. You can still supply filters within the code. And there's also new API. So anyone who's done any development for integration will be happy with this new API. JSON is a programming data type that has been a challenge in the past with integrating with other. It's a newer programming tool, or language, I should say, that was a challenge in the past. I know I had to do some development and do some crazy workarounds to work with another application that was providing me JSON data. So the good news is we're moving up. Microsoft is improving things, and you can now work with JSON. You can work with XML documents. There's also classes available for working with HTTP. You can send HTTP requests and receive those responses. And there's also a text builder tool that's available for working with large strings. So integrations and interfaces do work the same, and as I've shown, there's some things still available, and there's some new API, but there is one thing that's no longer available, and that's the .NET interrupt. So what that, in the development environment, what you could do with Nav is you could set your data type to .NET, and that made classes available to you. So you could work with file management, for example. So you could get the system to open up a file browser window to choose a file. So you can no longer do that when you're coding for Business Central. However, you can no longer use .NET is what I should say, the .NET interrupt, but there are other tools. So anything that you were using that was taking advantage of the .NET interrupt will have to be rewritten. So just wanted to keep that in mind for any of the developers out there. Source control required. So source control is management when you're doing customizations and managing that source code changes that you're making. So do you think that we need to manage that in Business Central? Any thoughts? Yeah, see a nod out there? So yeah, that's true. So in Nav, you have Seaside, and your objects are stored and your customizations are stored in the database. And you have access to modify those objects via the development environment and the object designer. In Business Central, the development environment no longer exists in the current release. So obviously, we need a different way of managing those changes. So in NAV, the modifications were immediately visible to users and other developers or anybody else who's working in the system. With Business Central and using the AL development, your source code is now file-based. So as I showed in a previous screen there, the files have a .al extension. So when you work on in your workspace, in your project for making customizations, you store those files, but until they're converted to extensions and loaded in your database, that source code stays in a file. So you need a way to have a central repository of storing those files. And also, you need a tool for handling merging and any conflicts that arise with different changes. Now, that could be for one developer, that could be for multiple developers. Because if you're developing on multiple things and just saving those files and not loading the extensions, you may have some conflicts. So there's two tools that are out there that are great to use, and they're highly recommended. The GitHub and Azure DevOps can be used for this exact purpose, for merging both your objects and then handling any of the conflicts that arise. So just keep those in mind. Okay, so we talked about a lot of differences. Do you think there's more? There's a few more. We're just going to touch on these briefly. That's true. So when we look again at Seaside, right, your NAV version of Seaside versus Business Central and VS Code, the file management has changed. Again, I talked about .NET. So there's fewer functions that are available to you for file management. That has changed. Again, you need to consider your version control. In Business Central now, you manage them, again, the customizations, the changes you make are file-based. In NAV, you had a way of managing your version control. So you could put version tags in there. You could filter your object designer for modified. You could look at the modified date. So some of that, actually all those three things go away. So you do need to consider version control and how you're going to manage your changes that you're making. Real-time compiling. So in VS Code, as you type, it compiles. There's no more having to compile any development changes that you're making. It compiles as you type. And your option strings, which are your drop-down, right, your defined drop-down list, those have been renamed to option members. So if you're working in VS Code, one thing to keep note of, if you see option members, that's just the old option strings. So after all this talk about customizations and development tools, you may be asking at this point, is there an easy way to extend pages? Yes? Can the average user make a change? Yes, they can. That's true. Yes?
In the old NAV, you
Yeah.
could add fields from the table to
Right.
the forms.
Right.
And then with pages, you no longer had access to those fields
Right.
unless it was a developer.
Yes, exactly.
What happens in Business Central?
Yeah, so that's exactly what I want to talk about, because I just, in preparing for this presentation with the new release of Business Central Wave 2, they've got a designer tool. So that's exactly what the designer allows you to do. So the designer allows you to modify your pages, and you can easily drag and drop fields. So let's say, and I didn't want to pop into look at this, but let me just talk to this first here quickly. So you can add components, so you can add fields, columns, depending if you're in a list or a card view. You can move the different components around. You can remove the different components and fields. You can change the importance, right? Because you can identify certain fields with a little asterisk of which one's important. You can work with that on your own. The quick entry, right? If you tab through fields, like if you're tabbing from one field to the next, you can control that. Let's see, freeze panes. So there's different panes that you can freeze. You can handle that with the designer. And again, just adjusting column widths. And you can actually edit the captions on some things as well, right in the client application. Nope. So every time you start this designer, you are actually creating a new extension. So they've kept everything consistent, right? We're talking about not modifying source code. The designer works the same. And what you'll see, and if we have time and my connection works here, we'll pop into the designer. But what happens when you design is when you go to exit the designer, it asks you if you want to save that file. So it does create an extension. You can save that file. And again, you would keep that in kind of your repository of your extensions. And again, keep in mind that every time you make a change in the designer, it's immediately visible to all users. So I don't know, is anybody familiar with the user personalization, right? And as you talked about, users prior, you could move columns or you could show hide columns. So user personalization still exists in Business Central, but again, that's user preferences. What the designer allows you to do is to modify something for all users. So let's say there's a field or multiple fields on the page that you don't use, right? Which is very common, and you want to simplify those pages so that individual users don't all have to, hide those fields. The designer allows you to do that.
That would only be in sandbox, though, right? All users that are in the sandbox, not in production.
No, production as well. You can use it in. Yeah, absolutely. So a couple things to keep in mind, probably pretty obvious, that fields must belong to the underlying table that you add. Some components can be dragged and dropped. Others you have to move a little bit differently through there. And again, you typically just want your administrator managing, modifying the system, right? But it does allow you a way to not be a developer and to make some simple customizations to pages. Oops. No, the designer is database-wide. Yeah. Sometimes for a group of users, what you can do is copy the user personalization, right, from one user to others. So that's one way of handling, right, the bulk changes rather than having to sit down with each user and have them change that. So this is a quick look at the designer in Business Central Online. So you'll see that there's ribbon pops open and there's options for changing fields, actions, parts, or pages. I'm going to quickly see if we can connect. I was trying to connect to the internet during the break and it was very slow. So let's see if we can pop in there. It might not work for us. It'd be great to show. I love it. You can take fields and just drop them all over the place. So on a card page, right, let's say you wanted on a vendor card, you wanted, the vendor's account number to show up in that first little section. You just take it and drop it. You take your actions, that you're in your ribbon, you take them and drag them so you can make them higher priority or more visible. Or maybe, again, there's lots of things in the ribbon that aren't useful, right? You can take them off. So it's a great tool. Yeah.
Customer card, it doesn't matter what role you're in.
Exactly. Yeah, the designer is meant to change system-wide. So the designer is probably most helpful when you're implementing, right? So rather than having your partner create a customization for you to pages, you take that responsibility on and you set up the pages the way you want them, right? And then from that point, you can refine that even more with user personalization, right? Yes, yeah.
All I have is field. There's no action part or page.
Right.
They're grayed out.
Exactly.
Way too that
Yeah, you know what? Those are actually, I noticed that too. Those are grayed out. But in the system below, you can modify. You can do all the things that would have allowed you to do anyway. So when you click field, right, it'll give you the field list down the right-hand side. And then from within the action ribbon, you can still add or remove, right? Yeah. So it's just a little bit, it shows those there, but the functionality that those would provide if they weren't grayed out is available to you in those sections. Yeah. So unfortunately, I'm unable to launch Business Central Online, so we won't go through that, but we talked about that a little bit. That's a way to, without the development tools and having the development knowledge, you can make some easy customizations. So let me see if I can get back to the PowerPoint slide here. There we go. Perfect. So upgrade path. obviously, all this talk about Business Central, if you're on Nav, you want to know, is there an upgrade path? So any guesses on that? Do you think Microsoft's given us an upgrade path to use? Yeah. They're so kind that way. So yes, that's true. There is an upgrade path. So there is a path and tools defined. So with Dynamics Nav, any supported version of Nav, there are upgrade tools and processing functionality that you can use to upgrade. Your customizations, as I said, have to be converted to extensions in order to move to Business Central. So once those are converted, you use the tools provided by the Microsoft to upgrade your version to Business Central. With the latest release and wave, I don't know if there's any GP or SL users in here, but there are also new tools for migrating other Dynamics applications over to Dynamics 365 Business Central. And the other thing too, I mean, with upgrading, I touched on it a bit, but it's huge. Like the fact that we've moved extensions out the way they are, the way they've structured the model going forward, the goal is to keep everybody on the current release, right, of the product, which again was not in the past. I mean, I've worked with clients recently that are still on Nav 2.6. So, you know, it's great what Microsoft has done here, and there's a really, you know, quick and easy upgrade path, and anybody on Nav can, and you know, GP or SL can be converted over to Business Central. So just a quick summary. We covered a lot of topics, so just to quickly recap, Business Central is available in online or on-premise deployments. The development tools now that you will use for any customizations are VS Code and the AL language extension. Any customizations or additions are referred to as extensions. Again, check the app source, right, to see what's out there. There's also in the expo, there are lots of companies with different apps, right, that you would see on the App Store, so different extensions, different extended functionality. So, you know, browse around there as well, but definitely check out the app source if you're interested in extending any functionality. And as I said, I know one of the tools we looked at just recently that's available was simply a way to change a dimension after an entry was posted, right? So users have been entering dimensions wrong, there wasn't enough controls around it. Now it's posted, client can't get into the, you know, the posted tables, right, to change those. So an extension, right, we're loading an extension for that client so that they can handle this on their own, right? So again, cost effective. They don't have to enlist a partner to build a routine, right, to allow them to change that. So there's, you know, small extensions, small apps out there, and also very large functional changes. So definitely check out the app source for any new functionality that you're looking for. So again, Nav customizations can be converted to extensions. When developing extensions, you need to subscribe to events and the external functions. Permissions can be handled in your extension objects by creating the extensions for that particular table. Your source control tools, Azure DevOps, JITbit are the way to go. And don't forget about the designer for quick changes to the pages, and of course, the upgrade path. So again, I have a couple of links here for some of the development tools, so getting started with AL, and also best practices when you're developing for Dynamics 365 Business Central. Yes, yeah, and again, at the back there, Roland, my colleague, he's got some flash drives with both the presentation and some additional information that might be helpful to you. So any questions? Yes?
What's the breakdown between online and on-premise, do you know?
I would say, I don't know the numbers, right? That'd probably be more a Microsoft question, but in my experience and our experience, a lot more clients are going to the online version as opposed to on-premise. I mean, it really is preference. But yeah, it kind of seems kind of the way of the future, right? All the apps, you know, if you work from your iPhone, everything's cloud-based, right? So it's kind of the modern, right, way of operating is cloud-based. Yeah, yep.
In which case do you recommend going to the on-premise version?
So the on-premise tends to be more for companies who like that internal control of their servers, right? They want that control and that management of their servers. If you have a large IT department that's managing, right, numerous components, and this is just another layer for them, it can be beneficial and you have more control, and then you're not outsourcing and paying an additional fee, right, for that management of your cloud solution. Yeah. Yeah.
Yesterday they said that there was 4,000 BC.
Oh, really? Yeah, 4,000 BC clients. I don't know if everybody heard that. Online? BC clients, yeah.
Is there still the ability to buy on-prem?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, there's
BC
BC
on-prem.
on-prem. Yeah.
Now on-prem.
Yeah, BC on-prem. So the difference, again, I'll just reiterate that. The BC on-prem, with the latest release, you no longer have the development environment, and the client app is now called this Windows 10 desktop app. So there are some changes, but on-premise is still available currently, right? I can't predict what Microsoft's future is, of course, right? They're moving towards, right? So, but on-premise is currently available. You can host your own installation. Yeah.
I'm really at the mercy of my third party. If they don't jump, I can't jump.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
We're
for sure.
on-prem, hosted in Azure, so we only use the modern client, so we don't have a desktop. And the only reason we
Yep.
did that was because our third parties aren't ready yet.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Yeah,
don't
perfect.
foresee Microsoft removing on-prem anytime soon.
No.
Because cloud manages, you can't put in certain regulatory, right?
Right.
bodies, Right?
Yeah.
Business Central, for example, is not PCI compliant unless you go with extensions.
Yes.
That might not be a solution for the
Yes,
customer.
yeah,
There are specific localizations that are not available
Yep.
online, so you
Yeah,
have to
correct.
go on-prem, like India is a-
for sure. Yeah, I agree. I think on-premise will be around for a while. Right, Business Central is new, right? And like I said, they just came out with Wave 2, right? Release number 2. So yeah, it's just improving and progressing. And like I said, I got excited when I saw Wave 2 because there was definitely limitations with the first release that, things you could do with Nav and you were like, oh, where'd they go, right? We can't do these things. And Release 2, some of the things started coming back, right? So yeah, it's improving, all the time. And personally, Business Central Online is my preference in working with the different products. I mean, everybody's different and comfortable with certain things, so I'm not, pushing anybody that way, but I do love the functionality that's provided with it.
Is moving from on-premise to online more of a soft upgrade, just easier?
Yeah. I mean, there really isn't any huge, like the underlying source code is identical for, right? So when you talk about upgrading and converting your data, it's just, right, there's really no difference. It's all about your deployment, the only thing that's different. What's underneath is exactly the same. The functionality is identical between the two versions. Yeah, or the two deployments, I should say. They're the same version. Yeah. Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, again, thanks for attending. It's great to see you all. Please complete your surveys for the session and have a great evening.